Hello and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the To-Do List. I am your host, Eric Fisher. This is the podcast where we talk to the people behind the productivity. This week we are welcoming back Jeff Goins to the show for a second time. Jeff has just recently come out with his book, The In-Between, and some people are going to maybe wonder, well, what does waiting have to do with productivity? What does boredom have to do with productivity? And I ask Jeff that question. He answers it very well, in fact. We touch on passion and calling and procrastination. We also touch a little bit more on some of the questions that could have been asked in the last interview, and so we bridge those into this one. This week, I'm bringing back Jeff Goins to the show, and a lot has happened in between. Jeff, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Eric. It's I was just wondering if it had been about a year. I know I was on, towards, when you were just starting the podcast. That's amazing that it's been a year.
Yeah,
that's kind of fun to.
Yeah, and thanks again for coming on so early when you didn't know who this guy was who's doing the show and.
Yeah, totally my pleasure.
So a lot happened since then. I know we met face to face at John Acuff's Quitter Conference, or then called Quitter Conference. It's now called Start. And that was, September. And you did an awesome job doing that. And you will be, and I guess it's almost September now, and you'll be speaking at his Start conference. So people should get tickets for that. And I will definitely be there. Along with speaking at a number of other conferences. It seems like I'm almost looking around every other couple weeks, and it's like, Jeff's speaking here. And there's pictures of you with, funny mustaches and hats and things. So...
Yeah. So it's been an awesome year. It's been a lot of fun transitioning from writing as a hobby to doing it full time.
Which is interesting because I think it was just shortly thereafter or right before that the success of your first book wrecked. Your wife was able to quit her day job and stay at home full time, and that was sometime shortly thereafter you were able to quit yours, and now you legitimately are a full time writer, that whole writer lifestyle, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, we moved to upstate New York and, bought a cabin and we live in the woods. We have a St. Bernard now. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. I guess, I am a full-time writer. Yeah, it's a dream come true, and I sort of have to go, oh, yeah, I'm doing this because when you're in the middle of doing something, you see how far you have to go still, and so I'm often humbled by that. But yeah, it's been a great year, and we definitely feel blessed to be on this journey. In
a sense, you're almost redefining that whole cabin in the woods thing. Because if people who listen to this would say, "Oh, you moved to New York," they don't know you're kidding. And
yeah,
but you live there down in Nashville with all my favorite people, and even moved on to teaching writing online with Tribe Writers, which is, I mean, how many classes have you had of that now?
I think we've had 4 classes, and we have over it's like an ongoing membership thing. People pay a one-time thing to go through the class, but then they remain lifetime members of this community, and we have over 1,300 people that have gone through that experience.
Wow. And the first time for that was late fall or somewhere in there, 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, if people are interested in that, we'll put the link for that in the show notes for this episode. I highly recommend it. I went through it. I learned a lot. What is the tagline again? Learning to write for the audience your writing deserves?
Close. Helping you find the audience
there it is.
Deserves. Yeah. And I mean, the idea there is this isn't really just about you. It's about your message. And your message does deserve to be found. It does deserve to change the people and things that it's supposed to change in the world, and you shouldn't feel weird about that, about trying to spread that message. And so that's what we help you do.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things we've learned as the internet has become more niche-filled, is that even if you don't think what you're doing is worthwhile, that in other words, in terms of other people's eyes, you might be surprised. There are a ton of people out there let me rephrase that. There are a ton of people out there who are going to be interested in what you will be doing and what you create. It's that you just have to find them.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've been amazed by that myself, just talking about my own struggles and solving my own problems. But as somebody told me that if there were, something like 7 billion people in the world, and we use this phrase, this idea that you are one in a million, which sounds like a really nice way of saying you're this, beautiful, unique snowflake. But if you do the math, and I've never been great at math, but I think it, factors out to something like if you are 1 in a million and there's 7 billion people in the world, then there are 7,000 people in this world that are just like you. And that's a pretty decent sized audience, a little tribe of followers that will resonate with everything that you could ever say or do. And I have found that anybody who has a message or an experience to share with the world, somebody's going to listen. And the cool thing about the web is now it's easier than ever to get connected to those people, to find that tribe, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. So you're transitioning, or have been transitioning, and you are now a full-time writer. And I've paid attention to some of the, more, what people would call productivity kind of things that you've actually written about in terms of like, it's now me. Like there's no day job to go to that's a stable income. It's now all on me. What have been some kind of your fears or your what are your issues, Jeff?
My issues, Eric, are the things that I have to rein in, but at the same time I think can be good things as long as there's this healthy tension, not just as a writer, but as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as somebody who is providing a full-time income for my family through unsteady means, through kind of up and down months. There's no real steady salary anymore. I am constantly afraid of that source of income running out. And so even if, we have enough money to live on, for the rest of the year, I'm still worried, well, what about next year and the year after? Like, when is this going to end? When is this going to stop? And I have to kind of, as I said, rein that in and couple that with trust and gratitude. But that is always looming, over my head that any day this could end. And I talk to lots of successful entrepreneurs, and they say that is a healthy thing. That hunger is a healthy thing to keep, keeping you striving and moving forward and not giving up and seeking out new challenges. But I do think that there's this it's important to balance that so that it doesn't turn into an unhealthy fear or a paranoia or some obsession that, it's always, that you're always looking for a reason to fail or for something to fall apart. So you do have to trust, just like with, a steady job, you have to trust that you're going to go in every day and not get laid off. And, sometimes bad things do happen, but if you walk into the office every day with that negative mindset, that's going to affect you. And the same thing is true with my vocation. And so I try to keep that front of mind, never getting too content or saying, oh, I'm set, I can just coast now. But at the same time, realizing that, I don't know what the future is going to hold, and I just have to trust and keep moving forward the best that I can. Yeah.
How have you maybe maintained focus on your days then? Because, you've got certain things you've got to do. I mean, aside from the speaking stuff, you want to consistently blog and, sit and write every single day. I know I've seen some things where you've said stuff like, I can't remember if it's the one single thing you have to do today or if it's 3 or what it is. I know maybe it's been modified. What have you done to maintain focus?
That's a good question. And I mean, I think the God honest, awful truth is on any given week, compared to, comparing last year to this year. Last year I had a full-time job. I was writing every single day, trying to build this dream of mine. I was, really working hard to provide enough income so that my wife could stay home and raise our son. And as you mentioned earlier, that turned into enough freedom and flexibility for her to stay home and also for me to quit my job. And that was awesome, but unexpected. I wrote more then than I do now, where I had an hour or two every day to just knock it out, to hustle really hard. There are days, many days, where I look, at my calendar, look at what I've done, and I realize, man, I haven't written at all. I was writing a lot more a year ago than I am now, and that realization has been really scary. And I think the reasons for it are I'm not just writing anymore. I'm not just doing this hobby on the side. I am building a business. I'm managing an audience. I'm I have a lot of things to maintain, and those things take up time. And I did have a realization a few months into doing this full time, where I realized, wow, like just because I have 8 hours a day to spend time writing doesn't mean that that it'll just happen. I actually still have to block out time. I woke up this morning at 5 o'clock to get some writing done because I knew that because I had interviews and all these different things going on today, that if I didn't block out some time early in the morning before my day actually started, I wouldn't have written. And so it's interesting because I thought it would be easy, and I've really had to protect that time. And I do basically have about one goal a day, but that some days are better than others. Something that I try to do every week, on my good days every day, but something that just kind of helps me gauge where I'm at is I have these 3 things that I need to do every week. I need to do something significant to build my brand, something to build my craft, and something to build my business. Those 3 things, if I continue to do those 3 things on a fairly regular basis, and there's grace there. If it's a busy week and I'm speaking at this retreat all week, then I might not get to do that. Or if I'm got my head down because I'm finishing up a manuscript for my next book, that might be an exception. But on a regular basis, 3 or 4 weeks out of every month, I need to be doing this stuff. And just real quick, the reason for that is if I stop building my brand, then I stop growing and I stop reaching more people, and my audience starts to stagnate, and I limit the amount of impact that I'm able to have. If I stopped building my craft, then my skill stagnates, and I cease to keep doing better and better work, which I'm not okay with. I want to keep getting better. And I think, your audience to a certain extent expects that too. They want to see you, they want to grow with you. And if I stop building my business, then I stop getting paid. You can be a good writer and be well known by people and not make a lot of money. And there are a lot of people on the internet that are doing that, and that's okay, I guess, but that's not a luxury that I have now that my family is being supported by this thing that I'm doing.
That's excellent. I had not even considered those 3 items. Some people would even consider those 3 things to be the one and the same, and I'm glad you broke those out because, again, some people would consider, like, well, my brand is my business and so is my craft, and it's like that's just it's all me. So if I do something, but I'm glad that you were very specific, and I'm actually going to adopt some of that myself. So very good.
I think people would say that, and I think that it's actually good to kind of separate those, because just because you get an extra 100 Twitter followers this week doesn't mean you can pay your bills by the end of the month. And just because you got a paycheck for something you did 2 months ago doesn't mean you are getting better and growing in your skill. And so what that looked like for me today is, to build my brand, I published a guest post on ProBlogger this morning. And to build my craft, I practiced writing something that I'm not going to publish just to grow. And to build my business, I went and cashed a check, and did some other things to provide income. I like to separate those things. Business is how we pay our bills, and craft is how you get better, and brand is how you get known, and those are very different things sometimes.
Excellent. So I have to ask, did the idea for this new book, The In-Between, happen to come to you while you were maybe singing John Lennon's Beautiful Boy to your son?
No, but yeah, he has that, John Lennon has that great quote about, life is what happens while you're waiting for, something else. That's partly true. The idea for this book came from really the past probably 5 years of my life. But I was learning this lesson about how life is slowing down and how I just keep rushing from event to event, and I started missing things. I was getting that. I was understanding that, but I didn't fully grasp it until we had our son, Aiden, and I realized that if I missed a day with him, as I sometimes did during this first year of his life, where I was on a trip or just gone for 8 hours during the day or something, writing in a coffee shop or something like that, and I would come back, he had changed, and I had missed something significant. And I realized, all of these daily mundane moments, man, when I miss one of those with my son, I miss a lot. And what if that were true, not just for him, but for everybody and everything in life. And what if life really wasn't about living for the next big moment or huge milestone, but most of life was just a series of these small moments that we could use for better or worse, that we could just rush through to get to the next big thing or actually slow down and enjoy them.
Yeah, I love the book. First off, this is one of those things, and actually I owe an Amazon review, so I'm going to do that, but I'm going to title it something along the lines of Words I Wish I Wrote. One of the few books where it's Words I Wish I Wrote, because other than, the actual memoir portions, because those are your experiences and I live my own story. But the fact that you're talking about stuff that's right up my alley in terms of it's not just about waiting in between the big experiences or, not being addicted to being like a thrill seeker and filling every moment, or a warning against saying yes to too many things. So we're not moving from, thing to thing in our schedule without time to catch a breath, or as what has most recently been titled the FOMO, the fear of missing out.
Right.
That leads to social media addictions and phantom vibrations in our pocket where our smartphones would be positioned. It's about all those things and much, much more. And I love that you did all that without ever going to the point of referencing a caterpillar getting into a cocoon and then becoming a butterfly.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That's a good one. We'll put that in the second edition.
Nice. There's the cover for your next book.
Yeah.
Again, it's one of those things where people would be like, how does waiting fit into productivity?
Yeah, how does waiting fit into productivity? I'm actually going to write about this on my blog later this week, because one of the things that I have done over this past year is I've tried to stop multitasking and started single tasking. And I have this addiction to always having to be doing something. And my wife just thinks it's ridiculous, because if I'm going somewhere, I'll throw a book in my backpack in case there's a little bit of time where I can, read something, I can accomplish something. If I go for a walk around the block, I'll grab my iPhone and pop my headphones in and listen to, an audiobook. I'm always trying to cram as much stuff in as possible. And my wife's always like, you don't need to do that. Or I'm always finishing something up before I rush to the next thing. I'm trying to fit too many things in to a small amount of time. And sometimes, in fact, enough times it works out that I keep doing it because I think I think I can accomplish more things than I have time. But more and more these days, that sort of blows up in my face, where I try to squeeze one last thing into my schedule before heading to the next meeting, and I'm late. Or I say yes to two things and double book myself and can't really be fully present to either thing. So what does waiting have to do with productivity? I think it helps us realize that some things in life are worth waiting for. Some things in life, in fact, the best things in life and in work, require slow, steady, deliberate practice. And what if being productive wasn't about doing a lot of things, but doing a few things well? And that's what I've been trying to do over this past year, and really been amazed by how much I actually am able to accomplish doing one thing at a time. Because instead of having 18 windows open and jumping from thing to thing to thing and feeling productive, and sometimes ending my day not having finished anything, setting out to accomplish one thing, and often being able to accomplish more than one thing in a day, but having that single-mindedness has allowed me to focus and do really great work. And it's done two things. One, it's diminished my long list of random tasks because I'm consolidating things into do this and follow through, and it's one thing. It's done that. It's actually diminished the amount of tasks that I have on my list. The second thing it's allowed me to do is it's given me freedom from having to go back and kind of clean up my mess. And everybody's different, but when I'm frazzled doing lots of different things, I make mistakes, and then I have to go back and correct those mistakes. And when I'm focusing on a single task, which essentially means that I'm waiting to do all those other things that are important, that feel really urgent. I'm doing this one thing right now. I do it well, and then it's done. And I don't have to go back and revisit it 5 or 6 more times because I've done it well.
That's a great example. I'm glad that you were able to really articulate that well, because some people are going to read the title for this show and be like, waiting? Patience? What are you talking about? I'm trying to get more stuff done.
Right.
And that's the point, is like we get so much stuff done crappy because we're doing all this stuff. And instead of being, mindful and having awareness and being present. The whole time I'm reading your book, I'm thinking of a line that a college professor used to say all the time to me, which was, wherever you are, be there. It's convicting, honestly. And so it was great to read examples of that in the book where you're talking about, like, for example, you're rocking your son on the porch and there's a sunrise sunset the clouds. Anyway, could have been any of those things, really. It's an Ansel Adams picture, and you forego, going in and grabbing your phone and taking a shot for Instagram and all that kind of stuff because you want to fully experience the moment. While I was reading that, I thought of this question, which is, do you take notes in those kind of moments like, oh, this is a moment I want to write about later?
I used to live, as a writer, you're sort of like, you feel captive to the muse. And I used to live like a prisoner to inspiration, which means that when I was inspired, everything else would stop and I would sit down and I would write until I had the idea on paper. And I thought the only way for me to be creative is when I feel inspired, I need to write and I need to be seeking out those opportunities to get inspired and then capture them. And I didn't really have much of a disciplined view of creativity. I just thought it comes to me and I write and it flows and it's good. But as I went back and would read that stuff that I wrote during those moments of inspiration where you feel like it is the most groundbreaking, earth-shattering revelation the world has ever heard, and you go back and you read it, a few days or weeks later and you go, that's not that good. I mean, it's okay, but it needs a little bit of work. And I really, after having this letdown again and again, I realized, what if creativity is more about showing up than being a genius on the spot? And so I saw this wonderful TED Talk, probably the best TED Talk there is, in my opinion, by Elizabeth Gilbert, where she talks about this idea of when creativity comes. And she just basically tells story after story about how, yes, something mystical does happen when we get inspired, and that's good. But those things often happen at inopportune times. And she told the story of, I think, Leonard Cohen or somebody, I can't remember, a musician, where he's driving in the car and he gets this wonderful melody in his mind, and he can't write it down. He doesn't have a recorder. He's stuck in the car, and we all have those moments in the shower or going for a run or wherever, these inopportune moments where we get inspired. And I used to stop everything and try to write those things down. And in fact, I had a moment like this morning when I was going for a walk with my son. I didn't have my phone or anything. And in the story, this person says, looks up at the sky, at God or the muse or that mysterious force that inspires you, and says, "Can't you see I'm driving here?" and just, continues on. And Elizabeth talks about how it's a discipline to believe that if the idea is good enough, it will come back to you again. And I don't know if this is reckless or whatever, but I don't want to live like a crazy person who's always waiting for the wind to blow the right way to get the words to say. And so that's sort of like a prayer or a meditation that I have, where I go, if this idea is good enough, if it's not for me, if the world needs to hear it, then it needs to come around when I've got a pen and paper. Otherwise, I'm just going to assume that it's for somebody else. And since I've started doing that, I don't feel like I've lost any great ideas. And the ones that come to me at inopportune times come back to me. Like that idea when I was going for a walk, I was like, I can't forget this. I should have had something to write it down. But that would have distracted me from where I was in the moment. And if I'm constantly carrying a pen or an iPhone app around with me everywhere, trying to capture everything, then I'm missing being there. And I think in some ways I'll miss that inspiration. And so as luck would have it, I come back home and I start working on some stuff, and I go, oh yeah, there was that idea, and I started writing it, and I captured it later.
That's great. I wondered about that because I've been a person who, ever since like junior high or high school, I've had this little. It's like the college rule, not the college rule, the little notebook. Like it's black with like white specks all over it, but it's like miniature. It's like the size of an iPhone, and so I'd have one of those in my pocket. and a pen, and I'd say, oh, I just had an idea, and I'd write down, 3 words. And so hope to remember that later. Would you ever allow that to happen where you're like, oh, yeah, that's a memory. You know what? I probably could write on that later. I'll just write down such and such memory and then maybe go back to that later and see if that was, to have like a bank of stuff maybe?
Yeah, and I'm not anti-note taking. I totally love doing that. I just, when there are those moments where I can't get it down or where writing it down would actually pull me out of the experience, I'm trying to be more disciplined about being present. But I have notebooks full of ideas. And I like what my friend Marion Roach Smith, who wrote a great book about how to tell your story. It's a book called The Memoir Project, which I read several times preparing for this book. She says, just write down a trigger, a detail, something that's going to trigger that memory for you. So maybe it's the yellow shirt that your wife wore that she spilled ketchup on when you guys went out for hot dogs or something, and it's going to trigger this memory and this feeling and this whole other thing. You don't have to sit and write on it for a bunch of time, but just capture a detail that'll trigger that for you. Just in a few words. And I like doing that. And I certainly do allow those opportunities to come. I think a great time where I'm still and I've got a laptop in front of me and I can just write is when I'm traveling, when I'm on the plane. I mean, that is a great time where nobody can call you, where you're not checking email, unless there's Wi-Fi on the flight, where you're present to your own ideas and creativity. And I really try to maximize those times. As I've tried to do this more and more professionally, I've also not hated. I've tried to embrace those less than spectacular moments where I get up and I sit down at my desk and the creativity and inspiration isn't there, and I write anyway. And I find the act of showing up will sometimes kickstart the creativity, but it's okay for it to feel like work some days, and that's part of the process too.
I know that David Allen calls, sitting down and dumping everything out of your head a mental sweep, and Chris Lacurto calls it a brain dump. Both of them kind of say, if you do that first thing in the morning and you just get your stuff out of your head, then you can kind of sift through it and see, and then your brain's an empty box, so then you can actually focus on, the tasks at hand or the experiences that you should be doing. Does that kind of feel like when you just say, okay, at 5 a.m. I'm going to sit down and write, does your head feel clearer after you've done that?
Yeah, and I mean it's a great thing to begin your day doing the thing that you love the most. It sort of sets a mood for the rest of the day, and it's like going for a run in the morning or working out or something. You can live off of that adrenaline high for the whole day. So even if this isn't your full-time deal, you can go into work and go, man, I did that this morning and I feel great. Yeah, I think my head's clear, and I feel like if I just spend all day managing interruptions and distractions with, social media and email and all that stuff, some days I am prone to that, where I'm just reacting. If I start the day creating long before I ever start reacting, I feel like I've done something productive. And when I just, endlessly react to things, sometimes I feel empty. I feel like, man, I haven't created anything new. I haven't put anything into the world that wasn't there before. I've just been responding to things. I just feel better about what I've done and the contribution that I've made.
Speaking of work that you love to do, I love that you talk about calling in the book. Specifically, you quote Stephen Pressfield saying that in the pursuit of our life's work, we often chase shadow careers. And you talk about, basically you thought, hey, I'm going to be the next Jimi Hendrix. And that's not who you are. You're a writer, but that's not to say you don't have any less passion for music per se. It's just that writing was always the trajectory that your life was supposed to be aiming towards, and you kind of line that out and kind of basically lay out, look, I switched tracks and I should have seen the signs earlier, but you wouldn't have seen them because you were living in that moment. You were in the in-between. And so that's one of those things where it's like just people don't realize that, in a sense, spending time – I mean, it's not sometimes it's not intentional, but sometimes it can be intentional where we say, okay, well, I'm doing this one passion when all the time they really should be working on the other one. It's a form of procrastination in a sense.
Yeah, and it's also to say that sometimes the time that you spend working on on something that doesn't end up being your career or your vocation or your life's work isn't time wasted. It's time preparing. You see this with writers a lot. Pressfield talks about this. Your past experience, even if you weren't writing, the experiences that you write from, in many ways, inspire your art. That if you were to just jump into writing at age 21, you wouldn't have been able to do that. And I think that's certainly true for Pressfield. I think that's true for other people like Stephen King, Anne Lamott, these writers that I really look up to. There was this season of struggle and even of failure where they were not doing what they were, quote unquote, supposed to be doing. And yet, as you get down the line, once they found their calling and they look back and they go, oh, that wasn't an accident. And in my case, I'd spent all this time preparing to be, the world's best guitar player. And then when it was time to not change tracks, but in a sense, pivot my purpose.
Yes.
I was able to apply the lessons that I learned about discipline from my dad and creativity from spending a year on the road and all of these different things that I'd learned from pursuing one creative vocation to another. And I realized, wow, all of this was preparation for my life's work. And it was important that I acknowledged it at that point. And I did kind of delay calling myself a writer, and I probably could have done it sooner. But I looked back on those 10 years of playing guitar, and I realized this wasn't time wasted. This was time preparing for the something to come.
I mean, it brings to mind that part in Quitter where Jon Acuff talks about that finding your passion isn't necessarily a search so much as it's kind of a recovery when you finally look back and realize, oh, that's what it was. But then, and I love that you're kind of giving a redemption to the and saying it's definitely not procrastination, that it's seeking your passion and working on your passion. The whole time you were working on music was not a waste of time because you had all of that now to write about.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and I think all we can do is pursue the thing that is on our heart right now, the thing that we think we're supposed to do, and that's what I was doing. I wasn't procrastinating. I wasn't putting off something that I knew I was supposed to be doing. And so what I'm not saying is you could just sort of do whatever and that's preparation. I was doing the thing that I thought I was supposed to be doing as well as I could have done it. And then as I pursued that, and this is true for a lot of people in history who find their life's work, who become a master of a certain craft. I've read about it, about Benjamin Franklin, Albert Einstein, a number of people. They're pursuing a vocation and they're doing it really, really well. And as they're pursuing that, as they're waiting for this thing to take off, they receive another epiphany, another revelation, and they go, oh, like this isn't exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And if you didn't pursue that first pursuit with your whole heart, I don't think you ever would have found the thing that, ended up being the thing.
Yeah, because essentially you have to practice no matter what it is that you're practicing towards. If you don't practice now on this thing, you won't do it when the real thing comes along.
Yeah, you have to learn how to practice.
Oh, yeah. That's great. You also talk a bit about what some would call boredom in the book a bit. In other words, most of life does not necessarily feel like an adventure, and it can actually feel more like boredom. Mm-hmm. And hearing that, it made me think of my almost 9-year-old daughter. And she says often, I'm bored. Mm-hmm. And I think a week ago or so, I saw a tweet online from Anne Marie Miller who said, we should never have a reason to be bored. And I said, but being bored isn't always bad, because that's what I always tell my daughter. And so we started talking a little bit about it. And she said that culturally, the word boredom or being bored was pretty recent. Like it was within the last century or so. And that made me think to look it up. And so I looked it up and I was like, I looked up the word boredom on Wikipedia. And it said that the first usage of that word was in the novel Bleak House by Charles Dickens in about 1850. I'm not saying that, like most people would say, well, social media and TV and all this. I mean, people have been bored or been living in the tension between, now and where they want to be their whole lives, the whole time. I mean, we can go back to, biblical times if we had to point to other places like that. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I like what my friend Gary says to his kids when they say, I'm bored. He says, if you're bored, you're boring. Meaning it's up to you to find an interesting life to live. It's up to you to make the most of this experience. The problem is that we, in an entertainment-driven culture, I think the reason that the word bored didn't exist before 18 whatever is because you got up, you worked real hard, you ate, and you went to bed. And that was your life, and you were never bored because there was always something to do. And now with technology and the industrial age where everybody didn't have to make or repair everything by hand. I mean, I just, dropped off some shirts at the dry cleaners today that had some stains on them. And if I didn't have that, I would be, sitting outside in this, with this tub and a washboard, scrubbing those shirts. But I don't have to do that. And I have time to, go out to lunch with my wife or whatever. And so I think that we have more opportunities to be bored. But what that also means is we have more opportunities to do exciting things. The problem is sometimes life doesn't feel like an adventure, but that doesn't mean that it can't be adventurous in some respect. But like you, Eric, I don't think there's anything wrong with stillness and just enjoying where you are right now. I like C.S. Lewis talks about this idea of love, where this is something that we say a lot in our culture. I love you, but I'm not in love with you. We're in love with the idea of being in love, and anybody who's been married for more than 3 minutes knows that feeling of being in love, I think for most people wears off or evolves. And I kind of get annoyed when people say, I'm still in love with my wife or still in love with my husband. Not that I think that's a bad thing, but I think that in some cases they're lying. they're creating this artificial extension of this feeling that wasn't meant to last forever. And Lewis talks about that, where he says, there's a difference between loving someone and being in love. And love is this long-term commitment. And when you make that commitment, feelings follow. But being in love is really having those feelings that lead to that commitment. The reason that you have those feelings is so that you would commit to that person or that thing that you love or want to give your life to. And it stands to reason that if the purpose of being in love is to lead to this deeper sense of loving someone, that it's okay for that stuff to go away. And he says, who wants to feel those butterflies in the stomach? Who wants to feel that uneasiness of being in love for the rest of your life? It is supposed to go away because it's replaced with what he calls a quieter love. And to take things, maybe an inappropriate step further, when I used to go on dates with girls, even my wife, I would get so nervous that I would have gas the whole time. And I'm glad that I'm not farting all the time and trying to cover it up. I still fart in front of my wife, but it's a whole different kind of conversation, not because I'm nervous.
Hopefully it's a quieter fart.
It's a quieter fart. But, there's something about this person gets me. And, yeah, you still want it to be romantic and you have to work towards that. And I'm not saying that that's not, that you should just, that marriage is boring or anything. But I think it's a good picture of life, which is to say that sometimes the exciting feelings go away. And that is actually a necessary death to lead to a longer-term, more fulfilled commitment.
Excellently put. So I have to ask this. Where are you now? Like, are you still in the in-between? Are you going to be in the in-between with other areas in your life in the future?
I think we are always in the in-between. I mean, that's why I wrote the book, because I kept waiting to be finished, to be done, to arrive. And even now, while I'm writing full-time and achieving success in some small ways, and some people would say big ways, doing some things that I never imagined I would do or that would take decades to do. I'm doing those things now, and I still feel this dissatisfaction, this undoneness that I need to top the last thing that I did. I need to keep striving, keep pushing. And as I said before, there's something healthy to that keeps you moving, that allows you to not grow complacent. I embrace that. But it's caused me to realize if I'm not happy now, or rather if I'm not completely 100% fulfilled and content, then what makes me think I will be ever? And so maybe I need to stop gauging my happiness by what I've accomplished and more by how satisfied I can feel with where I am right now, wherever that may be. And so I don't think I'll ever be finished. I don't think I'll ever be done until I'm dead. Leonardo da Vinci once said that art is never finished, it's only abandoned. It's one of my favorite quotes. And I see it as my responsibility, not to finish the art that I'm called to create, but to just not abandon it.
That's great. I know that you're even currently doing a series that you just started on your blog called the Slowdown Challenge. And I love this because, as I wrote in one of the comments on the blog, was I've intentionally been taking walks with not necessarily the ulterior motive for exercise,
right,
but and to leave the iPod. So I don't have any music. I don't have any podcasts, which is hard, but to just experience the experience that you're in as you take the walk.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for folks who do what we do and are immersed in tweets and Facebook updates and text messages, it is a discipline to step away from it. But I don't know what your experience has been with it, Eric, but I welcome it. I welcome just like not having to be tethered to my technology for 20 minutes. It's a great respite. It rejuvenates me and refreshes me so that I can go back and actually give something to the people that are wanting something from me.
It's like taking very deep breaths and just enjoying that, getting the oxygen to flow to your brain.
Absolutely.
It's the best kind of example I can give as to what it feels like for my attention. Mm-hmm. So, well, Jeff, it's been awesome to talk with you again. When is the next Tribe Writers coming up? I want to make sure people check that out if they haven't before.
We don't have any sort of set dates. We go through a class at a time. The classes take about 8 weeks. We're over halfway through our current class. So what is it, August? I would say probably beginning of October we'll do another registration call for signups.
And people can always sign up to get notified by the email. And usually you've got one free lesson out there, which is usually a good shoehorn into it.
Yep. Yeah, you can go to tribewriters.com right now and join the waiting list. You'll get a free few lessons in the meantime, get a feel for what it is, and then you can decide ahead of time if you think it's for you, and then we'll notify you when it's time to sign up.
Awesome. And obviously, people need to go grab The In-Between. It's well worth the read. Thanks so much for coming, and it's been great to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. It's always fun. Thanks for having me.
Well, that wraps up another episode of Beyond the To-Do List. Thanks for listening, and thanks again to Jeff for coming by and talking about The In-Between. I hope you can see how having a productivity show about just the nuts and bolts of productivity can get a bit boring. And so it's much better to branch out and talk about applying productivity to these other areas of our lives. I hope you pick up a copy of The In-Between and start to practice some of the learning to live in the tension between where you are now and the next big thing. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us some feedback at beyondthetodolist.com/iTunes, and we will see you next episode. Beyond the To-Do List is a proud member of Noodle.mx Network at Noodle.mx. Find more great podcasts like How to Podcast, Clean Comedy, Once Upon a Time, Christian Worldview, and more at Noodle.mx. Think, laugh, and succeed by subscribing to our podcasts at Noodle.mx.